I know it's Sunday morning. It's pretty early for me on a Sunday, so I'm going to start out with a little bit about me and then kind of go into how I got into what I do now. I like interactivity, so as I'm going, if you have any questions or things like that, please feel free to ask. I like tangents, so if you have a question, you want to go off on a tangent, I'm cool with that. So let's go off on tangents. Let's talk. I'm from Philly, so I'm a product of Philadelphia public school system. I grew up in Germantown. I live in Germantown again now. When I graduated from high school, I didn't go directly into college. I went directly into the Marine Corps. When I graduated from high school, I was a terrible student in high school. Terrible. I cannot understate how bad of a student I was. It was funny, I was going through like old boxes and my wife pulled out one of my old report cards and I was like, we gotta get rid of this. Like the kids can't see this one. Was constantly in trouble in high school, suspended for everything in high school from fighting to smoking weed in school. If you can think of it, I got in trouble for it. So I was not getting into a good college when I graduated from high school. So my dad was like, look, college isn't for everybody. It might not be for you, but you're gonna get out of my house. You're not gonna sit around on my couch. You're gonna do something. So figure out what it is you're gonna do, let me know, and then let's just go ahead and let's do it. So I was like, well, I'll join the military. I'll join the Marines. A friend of mine in school had already enlisted in the Marine Corps. So he was like, hey, why don't you come and talk to my recruiter, you might like it, might be something you're interested in. So I did that and I enlisted. When I joined the Marine Corps, I wasn't 18 yet. So I was 17 when I joined the Marine Corps. So my parents actually had to sign the forms for me because I wasn't old enough to sign the forms on my own. So the recruiter came home, my dad was just like, hey, show me where to sign. Let's do this. So 2 weeks after graduating high school, I left the Marine Corps. I spent 4 years in the Marines, and I learned towards the end of my 4 years that in the military you can re-enlist, but you don't have to re-enlist in the same branch. Usually they call you prior service when you do that. When I learned about that, I actually learned about that. I spent time when I was in the Marines in South America. Me and a group of other Marines had gotten attached to the Royal Dutch Marines. And they're like the Dutch equivalent of our Navy SEALs. So they have a contingent that's always in South America off the coast of Venezuela. So we got attached to them. So I spent a lot of time down there. And at one point we were coming back and there was engine trouble on the military transport plane we were on. So the transport plane, the pilots landed, the pilots got their stuff and they were getting off. And they were like, hey, we're in the reserves. We do this 1 weekend a month. Our drill weekend is over. Our unit's paying for us to fly back to the States. We hope everything works out for you guys. I was like, wait, so you're just leaving us here? But how does this work? Tell me more about this Air Force Reserve thing. I was like, this sounds pretty interesting. So the day after I got out of the Marine Corps, I enlisted in the Air Force Reserves. That was how I got into technology. I didn't learn anything about tech when I was in high school. No one talked to me about being a programmer or being a developer or the opportunities or the careers that were there. Because I was prior service, because I had been in the Marines, I didn't have to go to basic training or anything like that for the Air Force. All I had to do was just pick a job and then I would start doing my 1 weekend a month. As the Air Force recruiter was showing me the different jobs, she took me to one room and I was like, look, these guys are out of shape. They look like they're well fed. I just spent 4 years being tired, hungry, wet, cold. I was like, these guys don't look like they're missing any meals. They look like they're doing pretty well. I was like, that's the job I want. I had no idea what the job was. No idea. I was like, I want that job. So she was like, it's computer network and cryptographic switching systems. I was like, I don't care. I don't even know what it means, but I don't care. My job was an extremely technical job. And the Air Force, to their credit, has a really good system for preparing people who don't have a technical background. If you think about the average person that's going to the Air Force, they're coming from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different environments. They don't have a technical background, but you have to be relatively quickly prepared to go into a very technical career. So we learned everything from soldering circuit boards and binary and, how computers work and how systems work. So I got a really good foundation in technology from the Air Force. And a lot of people that I was in the Air Force Reserves with had civilian jobs that were really great tech civilian jobs. One of the guys that was with me, he worked for Lockheed Martin and he designed guidance systems for missiles. But these were people who had never been to college. It was simply from their technical, education and experience from the military that they were able to get into tech. And at that point, that light bulb kind of went off for me, and I was like, how come no one ever talked to me about this when I was in high school? How come no one ever told me about these opportunities when I was in high school? While I was in the reserves, I had enrolled in CCP. So I did 2 years at CCP, and I did dual admissions with Temple. So after 2 years at CCP, I then went on to Temple. My 4 years in the Air Force Reserves ended. I wanted to stay in the military, but again, I didn't want to stay in the branch that I was in, so I re-enlisted in the Army National Guard. So I'm probably one of the only people you meet that's been in 3 branches of the military. So I spent 12 years total over those 3 branches. I finished my time at Temple, but as I was finishing my time at Temple, I was also in officer candidate school for the Army, for Army National Guard. I graduated from Temple with a degree in finance. I didn't want a degree in something that I already had a background in. I have a pretty strong background in tech, so I figured it would be pretty redundant if I got a degree in the same thing. So I would get a degree in finance. I didn't want to get a degree in general business because statistically, you have a much better chance as far as career outcomes with a specialization in something like finance, economics, accounting than you do in general business. So when I looked at that, I was like, all right, I'm gonna do finance, which was odd because go back to high school, I was terrible at math. I was not a good math student, so I picked a business major that was almost all math. With the degree in finance, I started working in project management, but not in tech. Because I had the background in tech from the military, I didn't want to do the same thing in my civilian job, so I was managing construction projects. I was managing very large projects all over the country. I started out in construction and aviation construction. So I started out with an engineering firm that built airports. So I was building airports. And then went to a construction company that specialized in prisons. The only thing the company built was prisons. And we built prisons literally all over the world. I've done 6 prisons for the state of Pennsylvania. I've done prisons in Texas. I've done prisons in New Jersey, which was an odd job. It was odd for a couple of reasons. I made more money building prisons than I made building airports, which, if you think about that, is a really scary thing to think about. At the same time, I got to see firsthand the amount of money that gets invested in building prisons. You think about the fact that I did 6 prisons for the state of Pennsylvania. I could see firsthand that the state of Pennsylvania was investing more in building prisons than they were in schools and the education system. So it was a really odd thing, and especially for me coming from the background that I came from, I had experiences managing those projects that some of my counterparts didn't have. I did an expansion for Cole Township, and I was expanding a prison that I had people I grew up with who were in that prison. One of the things that happens when you're building prisons, you have to get a security clearance for every prison that you're building, every prison that you're working in. And I can remember the guy at the prison who handled all of those clearances coming to me and was like, do you know these people? Because some of these people were people I had visited at some point. So it's an odd experience where you're building a prison where people that you grew up with and you spent a lot of your a large portion of your childhood with are actually in that prison. At some point while I was doing that, I was still in the Army National Guard. I got deployed to Iraq. So when I came home from Iraq, I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to find something else that I could do. And I figured, all right, I have the tech experience, I have the project management experience. I'll just move from managing construction projects to managing tech projects. And I made that switch. So I ended up starting out managing, development projects, developing software and web-based applications, and then moved into working for financial institutions, managing system integrations. So I worked for a financial institution that most people have never heard of. And that's actually a part of their business model. Their business model is so that people don't know who they are. But what they do is they take over other banks' mortgage operations. And their thing is specifically mortgages. That's what they like. That's what they want. So they'll take over a bank's mortgage operations, but they'll never tell the customers that they bought that entire division from that bank. They leave it branded as that bank. So if you take HSBC Bank as an example, that was one of my projects. They took over the entire mortgage operations of HSBC Bank. So you basically rip it out and that now becomes a part of their company. But nothing changes as far as the branding, the name. It all still says HSBC Bank. When you call, customer service, if you have a mortgage with HSBC Bank, you're really calling this company. And their customer service people have a switchboard that tells them what bank you're calling for. So on one call, they could be answering the phone saying, hello, thank you for calling HSBC. And on the next call, they could be saying, thank you for calling Bank of America. So every time they took over a bank, I managed the integration of their systems, and I managed those teams, which were extremely large, complex projects. So if you think about a bank like HSBC, those systems supported more than $20 billion of financial transactions that were going through. So you have to integrate systems that have to support a very large volume of financial transactions and things like that, which having a degree in finance and the background in tech actually helped me with that. After that, I went to Penn Medicine, where I managed data infrastructure projects. Penn, as a health system, just like almost every other health system, wants to become a data-driven organization, and data-driven from the marketing side. So Penn was going through this transformation at that time, which was a little odd for them as a health system, where you had as much development work and tech things happening in your marketing department as you did in the actual tech department. What Penn wants to do is be able to say to people, hey, we have a great cancer treatment for you, but be able to say it to you almost before you know you need a cancer treatment. I mean, why? A patient is a consumer, a patient is a customer for a hospital. So Penn is no different than any other business. If you can reach consumers faster than your competitors, then you have an advantage. So if you're able to take large amounts of data and pull that data together and start to make predictions about, someone's likelihood of having certain illnesses, then you can beat your competitor to that consumer. So if you pull in, we're pulling everything, credit reporting history, household income, where you lived. You pull all this disparate data together. But when you start to mash it together, you can start to say, okay, there's trends here. And, these things together are telling me this, and these things together are telling me that. So if I want to be able to predict someone's likelihood of having diabetes, so I can market diabetes, treatments to them, or cancer, or whatever it may be, I'm going to pull a whole bunch of data and just start to look through that data to see where the patterns are, where the trends are, and what it tells me. So I managed all of that. And I managed that until I went full-time with running Coded by Kids. In the beginning, when I started Coded by Kids, I started Coded by Kids because I was managing large project teams in tech. I was managing teams of developers and designers and teams of QA people, but I was managing teams where very few people, if anyone, on my teams looked the way that I did. I was managing teams where there was very little diversity, if there was any diversity at all. And I was trying to figure out what the common thread is that would keep someone from my background who looked the way that I do out of tech and out of those jobs. And the one thing I kept landing on was education. It doesn't matter how much a company cares about diversity, or how much someone wants to improve diversity, or if you want to have a diversity hiring initiative in your company. All that is irrelevant if the people that you want to hire don't have the basic skills for you to hire them. So I started out teaching web development at a rec center. And in the beginning, it was just one kid showing up to the rec center. And at one point, the rec leader there was like, look, you got one kid coming. If you don't want to come back, like, nobody's really going to hold it against you. Like, it's cool if you don't come back. I kept coming. After a little while, another kid came. It was that kid's brother. I guess his mom was just like, look, you might as well just take his brother too. As time went on, though, more kids started to come, and we quickly got to the point where there were more kids coming than I could teach myself. So coming from tech, outside of the corporate tech jobs I've had, I've worked with startups. I've launched my own startups. I still work with startups to this day. I basically started reaching out to the tech community saying, hey, I need help. Is anyone interested in helping me teach programming and software engineering to kids at a rec center? And people started volunteering. So people started coming, more kids started coming. Before I knew it, we needed insurance, we needed to actually form a real organization. I was like, whoa, like this is the actual organization now. So we went from that one kid 3 years ago to, in 2016, we were teaching close to 90 kids a week. So, to go from one kid to teaching 90 kids a week is it's pretty rapid growth. And there's a lot that goes into sustaining that and keeping that going. One of the other unique things that we did, and I'm going to say unique, but it can also be a pain in the ass, is because I didn't come from the nonprofit world. I honestly didn't understand nonprofits. Like, I'm really good with nonprofits now after doing this and living it for 3 years. But in the beginning, I knew startups. I understood how startups work. I didn't understand how nonprofits worked. As I started to learn how nonprofits worked and how grants worked and things like that, I was like, hey, this is not sustainable. If we're relying on grants, if that grant funding dries up, then our revenue is gone. We need to have a more sustainable way of approaching this, and we need to run like a business. Whether we're a nonprofit or not, we need to run like a business. So I started a for-profit company, and that for-profit company runs side by side with the nonprofit. And we use revenue from the for-profit company to essentially fund the nonprofit. And then the nonprofit itself has earned income from things that it does. So we're able to run using revenue, and we don't have to rely on grants and foundations and donations to fund our operations. That gives us the ability to take grants, but use them to scale and to grow and to fund very specific things. We don't have to use it to fund our operations. And the for-profit company is essentially innovation and technology education. So, we'll partner with an organization, we'll partner with a nonprofit, we'll partner with a school, we'll partner with a university. And, we'll come in and run programs that are specific to innovation and technology education for them. It gives us a lot of flexibility. Relying on grants and foundations is a really tough thing to do in the nonprofit world. So to be able to say we can fund ourselves, it gives you a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility as a nonprofit, but at the same time, you're running two organizations. So you have to be cognizant of that with everything that you do. You're not running one nonprofit. You're running a nonprofit and a for-profit company, which both require a lot. And there's a lot that has to go into it. As far as innovation and things like that, we've been able to gain a lot of traction on both sides. We've been able to scale, we've been able to grow the way that we have, because I don't care about failing. for me, failing is just a part of the process of getting to the next step. And, you know, I'm often the one sitting down with my team and I'm saying, look, this is what we're going to do over the next quarter. You know, this is what we're going to do over the next 6 months. And, you know, my team will often say, I don't know if we can do that. Like, you know, it's going to be too much. It's going to be crazy. And I just shrug my shoulders like, I'm going to do it anyway. Let's do it. You know, let's see what happens. Let's figure out how it goes. Failing is a part of the process of getting to the next step. There is nothing wrong with failing. Failing is okay. Where failing becomes a problem is if you're not learning anything from that failure. If you're doing the same thing over and over and you're not learning anything from it, that's a problem. If you hit a wall and something doesn't work out and you're like, all right, this is what I learned from it and this is how I take this into the next iteration, you're fine. You know, you're essentially running an iterative approach, which is what you need to do in business. We've been able to move past a lot of other organizations and a lot of other companies simply because of my my tolerance for risk and my willingness to fail. You know, always think back to this thing that I learned about. There's a thing you do in business school and it's called Spaghetti Challenge. And basically the Spaghetti Challenge is you give a bunch of people in business school spaghetti strings, and you say, you know, you gotta, and they're dry spaghetti strings, and you say you gotta put this together in a way to build a tower to support marshmallows. And whoever builds the best tower wins. Now, like, I mean, it can be kind of difficult to do it. You know, your spaghetti strings.
Because we did it yesterday.
You did it yesterday?
All right. It would involve straws and pens, but
Same thing, right? Same concept. A group of researchers started bringing in kindergartners and would put the kindergartners against the business school students. And the kindergartners were winning. The reason the kindergartners were winning is because the kindergartners did not care about it not working. So the business school students would plan it out. You know, they were like, you know, we need to do this, we need to start here. The kindergartners just started building. It would fall over, they would immediately learn, okay, it fell over because we did this. We're not gonna do that again. Let's start building again. That thought process is something that honestly, like, I'm like that kindergartner. Like, look, let's start building it. But let's figure out what works, what doesn't work. Whatever doesn't work, you know, we throw that to the side and then we'll start building something else on top of it. And we do that over and over and over. Within my organizations, we tend to run in 2 to 4 week cycles. And essentially what we're doing every 2 to 4 weeks is saying, what do we want to change, what do we want to do, and what do we want to learn from it? And we'll run that cycle, and then at the end of that 2 to 4 weeks, we'll take a step back and we'll basically say, all right, how did things go? You know, what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to change, you know, what do we need to keep? And then we do it again and again, and we just keep doing it over and over. You know, you think about an organization that's an education-focused organization that was started by someone who wasn't an educator. But we now have schools and school districts coming to us to help them with their curriculum. That's only because, you know, of that tolerance for risk and that willingness to essentially just keep running and saying, like, it's okay. Like, it's fine if that doesn't work. And, you know, it's funny, at one point, I had a teacher say to me, she said, you know, one of the things we really like about working with you is you can do whatever you want in your classes. You can try new things, you can pilot new programs, you can do all these things, but we have a very low tolerance for risk in our schools. So we can't try anything new in the school. But with working with you, you can try these new things, and then you can bring those new things into our classrooms where we wouldn't be able to try them on our own. Being willing to risk things, being willing to fail is really how you stay ahead. It's how you push forward. Now, with that, I will say you have to be careful, because if you're willing to risk things, if you're willing to fail, you're going to fail sometimes. And it hurts. I mean, you know, especially as you start to grow, it hurts for a couple of different reasons. I mean, like, we're all people, you know, we're all human. It hurts emotionally sometimes. It hurts mentally when something that you really thought was going to work doesn't work out. It hurts financially. I have to make payroll every month. So as I'm saying to myself, like, hey, I want to try this or I want to try that, I also have to be aware of the fact that no matter what I do or what I want to try, I still have to pay the people who work for me. I still have to make payroll. That has at times resulted in the fact that because of the cost that was invested in something we were trying, I may not have been paid that month because I still have to make payroll. Being willing to risk things, being willing to fail will lead to a lot of your greatest successes. But you have to be cognizant of the pain that comes with it, and you have to be willing to accept the pain that comes with it.
So I have some questions. You've been sharing some really good information, and I think for the students in here, many have talked about starting either business, like startup types, or these community programs that have huge community engagement or community impact that will have a need for partnerships and all that involved. Yes, that's people nodding. You were sharing part of your story that you started doing kind of like what turned into Coded by Kids at this rec center. And there was one kid, so congrats for hanging in there. And then you kind of said, look, we went from that one kid to his brother, and then more kids, and then volunteers came on. So I don't want to take away from your magic, but I'm assuming there wasn't pixie dust sprinkled on you. What happened that significantly shift from those first 2 kids for you to more kids, to 90, and same thing with volunteers? So can you explain a little bit more about that?
One of the biggest things is sticking it out. Things often aren't going to work out in the beginning. And this is a conversation I have with people a lot who, they see the traction that we have now, they see what we're doing now. I actually had someone say something to me, the other night because, the mayor and a city council person were giving a speech and they were talking about us. They were like, well, you don't really have to worry about these things because you have all this support. But there was a long time with no support.
What's a long time? What was a long time?
I'm gonna say like 2 years.
It was like,
I mean, like for there was a long time where I couldn't even hire anyone.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but like during that time when you left, what gave you that discipline to stay the course though? And you wasn't seeing the success that you thought you should.
So a part of it is the internal drive. Like you have to be internally driven. You also have to be willing to commit and stick to that commitment. Once you make a commitment, you gotta stick it out. That doesn't mean if it's not working, you keep doing the thing that's not working. You can pivot along the way. You can say, well, this part isn't working, so if I kind of switch it, and move it to this, I may have better results. But if you commit to that larger vision, commit to it. You don't say, hey, this isn't really working out, or this is tough. I don't know if I can do it. You've made the commitment. What happens over time is you're going to start something, right? There's going to be 10 other people that are starting things pretty similar, if not exactly the same, at the same time you're starting something. The ones that are going to have the success and the traction are the ones that commit to it and stick with it. Because along the way, the people that can't stick with it are going to drop off. Like, this is not easy. There is nothing easy about this. I was having a conversation with my 13-year-old son the other day who wants to be, he wants to start a tech company. And, I was like, you've grown up watching me do this. Like, is this really something you want to do? Like, knowing firsthand how difficult this is? And he's like, yeah. But like, a lot of people don't understand just how difficult this is. You make the commitment and you just keep pushing. What also will happen is when people see that you're truly committed, then that will bring them on. And that's really a part of leadership. And like, honestly, a lot of these are things that I got from my time in the Marines. I tell people all the time, like, I didn't learn about leadership in business school. I learned about leadership as a Marine. I learned management in college. And management and leadership are two very different things. Leadership is, can you get people to work for you for free? and be happy doing it? Can you get people to commit to the vision that you committed to? As you get people to do that, people will see your commitment, people will see your drive, and people will want to also commit to it. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
All right.
And going back a little bit, so more kids in the program, more volunteers, and then able to hire staff. Can you speak to what either literally significant steps you take, like specific steps you took to get more students, more volunteers, more people involved?
And those steps evolve over time. So in the very beginning, to get more students, we started reaching out to schools in the city and letting schools know what we were doing. Reaching out to parent groups, letting parents know. We were also pretty fortunate in the beginning to get a lot of really good word of mouth. And one kid would tell another kid, and one parent would tell another parent. To bring in volunteers, we started reaching out to tech companies in the city. We started reaching out to meetup groups that focus on tech, saying, hey, this is what we're doing. I would send emails out to 4 or 5 meetup groups in a week and say, hey, can I come and talk to your group this month or this week? For bringing in staff and things like that, that's the more challenging thing. And hiring people, finding good people. I mean, it's always going to be a challenge, especially with a startup and being at an early stage, because often you're saying to people, hey, I'm asking you to make a commitment to me, but we don't have the stability of a Comcast or something like that. So I need you to make this commitment because you really believe in what we're doing. As we grew, how we brought in students, how we brought in volunteers, how we bring in partners now, things like that has evolved. We rely a lot on press and things like that, and PR, and really playing with different types of PR to nail down the types of PR that are best for certain groups and certain demographics. We want to do, in 2017, we want to do a push to bring in more Latino students and Hispanic students. So we reached out to Aldea and said, hey, would you be willing to run a story on us and do a feature on us so we can start to reach these different communities, so we can start to bring in more students from these communities. So really figuring out how to use targeted PR and targeted outreach and targeted marketing. As we've grown, we've started working more with CDCs, community development corporations in communities. We have a really good relationship with the City of Philadelphia, where the City of Philadelphia helps us with outreach. We have really good relationships with schools, where they help us with outreach and things like that. Bringing in volunteers, I try to have a relationship with almost every tech company in the City of Philadelphia. And I mean that literally. There are very few tech companies where I don't have a relationship with, either a senior executive or the person running the company. And I do it very intentionally. I do it intentionally because I want the support of the tech company, but I also need their developers for volunteering. We teach software engineering. When we're teaching software engineering to kids, we're teaching very complex concepts. Because of what we teach, our volunteers have to not just be people who care about kids, which, if you think about most youth organizations, you just need people who care about kids. With us, we need people who care about kids, but also understand software engineering and programming, which really limits our pool of people that we can choose from. So having relationships with tech companies throughout the city, I'm able to go to a company and say, hey, look, do you have 4 or 5 developers that are looking for volunteer opportunities? Do you have a couple developers that are looking to get engaged with something? A lot of tech companies, if they hire someone that's coming from outside of Philadelphia, they'll point them to us as a way of getting engaged in Philadelphia's community. You know, they'll say, hey, you know, you're new here, you're new to the city. We have a really good way for you to get engaged in the community. A lot of the tech companies that we work with will give their employees paid time to volunteer with us. So, you know, they'll say, we'll give you, you know, a certain number of hours each month, and you can spend that time volunteering with Coded by Kids. So having those very deliberate relationships helps us to pull in the volunteers that we need consistently, and having that consistent pipeline of volunteers. You know, it carries a lot of weight when the CEO or CTO of your company is saying to you, hey, it would be really good if you went there and volunteered. You know, especially for people that are already, you know, inclined to volunteer. They're just looking for something to get into. If your CTO comes to you and says, hey, I have a really good thing for you, you know, I know you wanted to get into volunteering, it helps a lot.
Going back to, and then I want to open it up to your questions too, creating sustainability. You said that you realized that it didn't work just to be a nonprofit model anymore. You need to figure out kind of a new business model and how to kind of create this for-profit model. What research or info or tools that you used to come to that conclusion? Was there actual market research that you were doing, feedback you were getting? What that look like?
I took time and started talking to people who were running traditional nonprofits. And, you know, we were having conversations just about, like, you know, where does the bulk of your funding coming from? How is it working out for you? How are you funding programs? How are you funding operations? What trends are you seeing? I started looking into, you know, just the state of local nonprofits. And from a lot of those conversations, I started hearing the same things over and over. You know, yeah, grants are cool, but, you know, we can't do this, or we can't do that, or, you know, we had problems with this, or, you know, we had a budget shortfall with this. And as I was going through that process, I saw 3 nonprofits shut down. They had to shut their doors because they were getting year after year funding from a couple of local foundations. And all of a sudden, those foundations decided that what they were funding was no longer their funding priority. And they said, well, we're no longer going to fund these types of things. So immediately, these nonprofits that were surviving on that revenue stream no longer had revenue. So they essentially had to shut their doors. And one of the commitments I made, you know, early on to our kids was, we're not going to shut our doors. Whatever we need to do to survive, we're going to do to survive. So seeing that, I was like, you know, we need to come up with a better model.
Questions from you all?
So I think for the most part, I'm pretty sure all of us students in here, we're all part of this millennial era where, you know, we've kind of had technology integrated in our life in a whole different way. But the kids that are like younger than us, it's not even integration, like it's just their life, period. So my question is, I have a son and he's 2, and like he knows the iPad probably almost better than me at this point. So my question is, do you feel like technology is going to inhibit the kids as they're growing with it, like as a part of their life, or is this just what the landscape is going to be?
So, I mean, I'm going to say 2 things. One, I'm going to say this is just what the landscape is going to be. 2, I'm going to say, I always caution people, there's a difference between being a consumer of technology and a producer of technology. And what tends to happen is, we're immersed in technology, our kids are immersed in technology, but from the perspective of consumers, which can be very insidious, and it can have a lot of negative consequences. Where we should be immersed in technology is as producers, and we tend to not be immersed in technology from that end. And if you understand how to leverage technology to impact, you know, your community, to build a business, things like that, you're approaching technology from a very different, you know, perspective. You know, your view on technology is very different. If your kid is leveraging that iPad just simply to push on and play games, where's the clear benefit? You know, your child is now consuming technology that was built by someone that probably doesn't understand them, that, you know, probably has very different motivations than you. You know, like, I have conversations with people a lot about the state of education technology, where most education technology that's being made right now isn't being made by educators that have the best interests of the kids at heart. They're being made by tech companies and startups that are looking to raise venture capital and make a profit. So their motivations and your motivations are very different. So if that's how your child is consuming technology, that can be problematic. But if your child is immersed in technology in a way where he's learning to leverage and, you know, and do things that are impactful, that's very different.
Makes a lot of sense.
How would one who doesn't have a background in technology go from being a consumer to a producer?
Knowing where your strengths and weaknesses lies is very important. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is, can you be the technology person? And that answer for a lot of people is no. You have to have a very specific mindset. You have to have a way of looking at things, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses. If your answer is I'm not the tech person, then you need a tech partner, and you need someone who you can rely on, who you can trust. The two of you share the same vision, and you'll work together to build that vision out together. That answer your question? Yeah.
You were talking about, in reference to Kenny, how his son used to ask, we talking about the consumer aspect versus the producer aspect. This summer I'll be sharing a symposium for young black men, and I want to be able to, I guess, give them some kind of information about, you know, being producers in Wisconsin. Are there like apps or anything like that where you can kind of teach young kids about how to code or how to learn different aspects of being a producer?
So there are. There's a lot of different things that you can use to start down that pathway. The question, and this is a much larger question, because the question really comes into what your goals are. If you want to expose people, there's a lot of stuff on the internet, and you know, I'd be happy to share some of those things, you know, with the group that are free, you know, and low cost. But again, it's going to come down to goals. So if your goal is, hey, I just want to expose people, those things are great. If your goal is, I want to enable people to start to build real things, then you need to go beyond that. But in many cases, just starting with exposure is more than enough to spark the interest for people to move on to the next step. So I mean, I'd be more than happy at some point. I can send an email, I guess, to you guys and share some of those resources.
Hi, my name is Quinn. I would love to talk to you offline because I think that there are a lot of things where we kind of intersect in what you're doing and what I'm looking to do. But one of the questions that I have is, with women being so underrepresented in the technology field, is your organization making a push to get more girls involved, or is that something that you consider?
So we're going to have a little real talk right now. I always caution people when the conversation, specifically around women in tech, comes up, because in tech, it's not women, men. There's very stark differences based on gender and race. So black men and Latino men are almost at the bottom. But if you look at it just men versus women, it gives a false appearance that some people are doing better than others, when really it's not. It's you have to get deeper into that. Like, race and diversity is very nuanced. And to take a gender approach, it extracts some of the nuance to diversity. So you have to look beyond just gender and look into race and things like that. Our classes are about 50-50. Our classes are 49% male and about 49% male and 51% female. One of the things we do is essentially say, like, we won't run, you know, our classes for one or the other. You know, our girls are just as important to us as our boys. We look for both racial and gender diversity in our classes.
What's the age span for your class for kids?
5 to 18.
I have a 16-year-old, so
Yes.
I think I'm sending you but it's not music and technology, nothing else in the school reaches it.
Okay.
So,
You had a question too, right? I'm gonna come right back.
Hi, I'm Kyrie. I work in the tech field. I'm a user experience researcher. So I'm kind of like on the same page as you as far as just getting more representation there. So I was curious about your opinion of what Silicon Valley has done in response. And if people aren't aware, about a year and a half ago, I guess, they were basically audited. People were asking, what are your diversity numbers? And there were companies who refused to share them. Some did share them, and it would be like less than 5% black people, maybe 2% at the best. So my question to you is, what is your opinion to their response to it? And I think about a week ago, Mark Zuckerberg said he blames the public schools for it. Like, that's why we don't have any minorities here.
So, I mean, like, they really haven't had a response. I mean, so Facebook has 1% of Facebook's developers and software engineers are black. 1% of Google's developers and software engineers are black. And this quarter, companies over a certain size have to release their diversity numbers. And they've all delayed releasing their diversity numbers for this quarter because everyone believes that their numbers are going to be just as bad as they've been before. So they don't want to release them yet until they can come up with a good explanation for why. Do I think public schools have anything to do with it? I think public schools do have a role to play. Are public schools completely to blame? No. Public schools are one piece of a larger puzzle, and I guess that goes into the nuance and some of the difficulty with addressing diversity. If public schools aren't giving kids the basic foundation that they need, then even if I run a company and I'm saying I want to have a diverse company and the kids don't have the basic foundation, then I don't have the pipeline to hire from. But at the same time, as a company, I need to be willing to take the steps to hire a diverse workforce, which a lot of companies don't. I was having a conversation with someone about using the term fit, and I don't think someone's a good fit for our culture. And my response was, well, what's your culture? If your culture is being set by a homogeneous workforce, if everyone at your startup looks and talks the exact same way, then by default you're going to exclude people, because if you're saying, I don't think someone's a good fit for our culture, your culture is being set by a bunch of 20-something white dudes. So of course, anyone who doesn't fit that isn't going to be a fit for your culture. So I mean, I think there's a role to play in general. I think tech companies have done a really poor job at trying to find. I mean, because at the same time, there are, black software engineers. There are black, user experience people. I mean, like, I know a lot of them. They've done a really poor job at reaching those people. They've also done a poor job of retaining those people. And I had a conversation with a group of directors at Comcast about this, where, you hire 5 black software engineers and you say we were successful, we're now a diverse company, and 3 months later, all 5 of those black software engineers leave because none of them felt comfortable there. Were you really successful? Or, you have to ask yourself at some point, what are you really doing? So, I think for public schools to be able to say, we're giving kids the skills they need, we've equipped them, that's one piece of the puzzle. The reason I started, my organization is because being a manager and being there when we were hiring developers, I often saw, I don't think they had the skills, as an easy way of dismissing someone. So one of the things I said is, if I'm immersing our kids in this and I'm teaching our kids these real skills from day one, no one can ever say to our kids when they go after a job, they don't have the skills. You're not qualified. So that's one part that's solved. But then the second part is on the companies. And I think companies just haven't really done much to fix it.
Hey, I'm Janine. So I know you were saying that when you started your nonprofit, that you had no clue on how to start that up. We're all here trying to start businesses. So can you give us some tips on how we can start nonprofit organizations and start working ones?
Starting a nonprofit, I would say the first thing you really need to do is think about what your model is. What is it you want to do? What problem are you solving? Once you have a clear idea of, and I can't emphasize the word clear enough. Once you have a clear idea of the problem that you want to solve, what it is you're doing, then you need to look at, is it really a problem? How many people is it a problem for? Is it a problem for one person, or is this a systemic problem? And then, are there other people that are solving the same problem? If there are 5 other nonprofit organizations that are solving the exact same problem that you want to solve, it may not be a good idea to start that nonprofit. You may be able to do better by helping one of the other nonprofits, because those 5 nonprofits that are already doing it are all competing for the same pool of money, and you're competing for the same pool of people. So do you really need to start another nonprofit to compete for the same things? If you see a gap, if you look at what those other 5 nonprofits are doing and you say, well, they're all doing this thing, but they're missing something that's really big. There's a really critical part of this process that they've missed, and we can fill that gap if I start something. Then, okay, I could see going forward. But just starting with asking yourself those questions. Once you ask yourself those questions, look at your model and say, how am I going to pay for this? Where's the money going to come from to fund this model? And every model is a little different. Some models you can rely on corporate sponsorship. Some models rely on public donations. Some models rely on foundations. You would have to really look at your model and say, how do I pay for this? Where's the funding going to come from? And is this really fundable? And sometimes the question of, is this really fundable, is a hard question to ask yourself. Because if you believe in something, you will by default say, yes, this is fundable. I would pay for this. But it's not a question of whether you would pay for it or not. It's really a question of whether everyone else would pay for it. From there, really figuring out the structure. How do you want to structure it? Who do you need? For a nonprofit, you're going to need a board. Your board is going to be very important. Your board is going to be very important from an oversight perspective. You can get a working board where people have very specific skill sets, and they're providing those skills. For our nonprofit, For Coded by Kids, we don't have a lawyer because one of our board members is a lawyer. So a part of his role on our board is functioning as our lawyer. So you're going to need people like that. Your board is also a signal to potential partners and potential funders of the level that you're playing at and how serious you are. There hasn't been a time when I've had a conversation with anyone about a partnership or funding, and they haven't said, who's on your board? If you have people on your board who themselves have good reputations, that paves the that makes a lot of things smoother, because people are essentially saying, oh, if these people are on your board, then you must be legit. If people say who's on your board and you list off like 7 names and they're like, I have no idea who these people are, they're like, I'm not really sure who you are or what you're doing. So you got to really think through and be strategic about who you bring on your board. You're going to need to bring people on your board who can help bring in money, bring in resources, bring in partnerships. If it's a working board, people who can actually do stuff and fill a need that you have.
Sylvester, can you mention a little bit, before you were able to hire people, what was the most significant either team member you had or connector, and then when you finally able to hire people, what was the first position you hired for?
Before I was able to hire people, I relied a lot on my board. I'm fortunate to have a board that's full of a lot of really good people in the tech community that have a lot of really good experience. They carry a lot of weight, and being able to push on them and rely on them You know, one of my board members is, you know, the co-founder of a tech media company. So when I needed PR, to say to him like, hey, I need you to get us PR, you know, it was a very easy thing. Having a board member, there was a lawyer that I could lean on, where I didn't have to pay a lawyer. I mean, like, those things really helped me in the beginning. The first hires that I made, I'm gonna say that there were two that I made together. One was a CTO, and one was my operations manager / chief operating officer. And I made those two hires first because what we do at our core, we're a tech company. I mean, so on both sides, on the nonprofit side and on the for-profit side. For both, we develop all of our own internal software. We develop all of our own tools. We actually take in projects for our working age teenagers to work on. So within our nonprofit, we're running a functioning development shop that runs just like any other development shop would run. The only difference is our teenagers are the developers and the adults are the leads to give them guidance and help them through. So we're running a tech company. I can't be the CTO and the CEO at the same time. So I needed a strong tech person that could come in and take a lot of that tech stuff off of me so we could still function like a tech company. But then I could also be out negotiating partnerships and, you know, bringing in money and things like that. And the operations manager, because you get to a point where there's so much happening that you're setting the strategic direction of the organization. You're in meetings. I mean, like, the majority of my time during the week is spent in meetings. I can't do the daily details just because I don't have the time anymore. And, you know, we actually got to a point where, like, I was running into a lot of problems because I was still trying to do the day-to-day, you know, detail things to keep the organization going, and things were getting dropped. You know, things were getting missed. And I had to bring in someone that I could say, all right, your focus is these day-to-day things to keep us moving forward. You know, this is what you do. So, I mean, those were the first two for me. And then, you know, after that, user experience designer, to focus on the experience of our classrooms, the experience our students are getting, the experience our parents are getting, and really focusing on bringing in more instructors, and then marketing and outreach.
Other questions?
So I have a really micro question, and I think it's an interesting thing to hear from different people and so far. So when you decided to take your mission statement, which clearly came from kind of a Wendy trajectory, kind of similar to what I was talking about yesterday, what were the actual steps that you took in order to take that mission statement and turn it into something that was tangible, at least for you? But I'm not talking about the research or due diligence, because I think you covered that. I'm talking about, like, the really micro. Did you cut and paste? Did you go to different sites and then cut and paste and put it into a document? Did you create a diagram? Did you have a white wall? Like, what were those steps, and are there any best practices you can give to these students who might be looking to start a similar company or a space?
So I'm gonna say all of the above. To get from that mission statement to, like, what is this tangible thing? It was a lot of really looking at, and the mission statement had to evolve and change at times to fit what was tangible and what wasn't tangible. You know, your vision can be out there, but your mission has to be, to some extent, you know, tangible and reasonable. And, you know, really sitting down and mapping out, like, if our mission is to do this, we're gonna have to do these 5 things, and what do those 5 things look like? Who else is doing those 5 things? You know, so I would spend hours on the internet, you know, researching other people that are doing one of those things, you know, and look at how they're doing it and map out, like, all right, they're doing this well, they're doing this well. You know, I would reach out to people that I knew that knew other executive directors or other CEOs that were doing parts of what we were doing and say, hey, can you connect me with this person so I can talk to them. And I would just, meet with them and talk like, all right, how are you doing this? And just write it all down. Like, all right, how are you doing this part? How are you doing this part? How are you doing that part? And then take out the things that I thought we could use and start to build a framework from there.
How long did it take you yourself personally?
Still doing it.
Well, for the initial idea and then for each iteration for Coded by You. So you did Coded by Kids, I think that was first?
Yep.
And Coded by You?
So we were a year into Coded by Kids before we started Coded by You. The initial phase was probably 3 to 6 months. And then that next iteration after that first 3 to 6 month period, the first 3 to 6 months was really just, I have all of this information, I'm making all of these assumptions, I need to start testing my assumptions, and I need to start seeing what is valid and what's not valid. So that first 3 to 6 month period was really just testing a bunch of assumptions and seeing what works and what doesn't work. After that 3 to 6 month period, it was like, okay, now I have a better idea of what works and what doesn't work. Let's start nailing some things down. Let's start saying, okay, this is going to be our process for this is going to be our process for that. Then we moved into, okay, let's add in Coded by You. Now, we're kind of still going through it, but what we're at the process now of doing is continual process improvement, where we don't have wide swings in our processes and in our procedures. In the beginning, we did. Now it's, let's take this process and let's tweak this one part of it to make this one part better. And let's take this process and tweak it to make this, this one part of it better. I mean, a part of it for me was diagramming out every process. Every process that we have, whether it's onboarding new students, whether it's onboarding new instructors, I basically mapped the entire process out. I said, what is this process? What are every component? What's each touch point? What is each part of the process? Mapped it out, and then as you test those assumptions, you get to a better and better point where the whole process isn't changing, and then you just start tweaking as you go, which is where we are now.
And then my last question is about staffing. So it's interesting because staffing in my own company has been challenging, and a lot of people, when they come in, they talk about getting staff, and it sounds like, well, I just found a CEO, I found a CTO. Do you guys know what CTO and COO is, by the way? Chief Technology Officer. There's literally a chief officer of everything now, but yeah, that's chief technology. And the COO is the chief operating officer. So how did you find that? Because I know that it can have either been easy or maybe you just were blessed with genius people.
No. For our CTO, she was she actually started out as an intern / volunteer. She was finishing up her computer science degree at Temple, and I started intentionally dropping things on her that I knew she didn't know how to do. So I would say to her, "Hey, I need you to build this thing for me," and I would just drop it on her, and come back and see how she did with it. Like, all right, you did pretty good with that. Maybe you should do it this way next time, a little differently. And just kept doing it over and over and looking at how she responded to things that she didn't know, how she responded to being in unfamiliar and often, stressful situations. And she did really well. So I sat with a few people that are supporters of our organization that are CTOs and said, hey, she's really talented. She has the skills to get there. Can you guys, having been CTOs, work with me to essentially turn her into a CTO? And that's what we did for her. And for her, there was a progression of giving her more and more responsibility, where I would carve off one thing and say, this now belongs to you. You are solely responsible for it. You need to set the budget for it. You need to manage the people for it. This is yours. And then once she got good with that, I would drop something else on her. And often I was dropping things on her before she was ready for it, which is a part of it. Like, you're not going to be ready for everything, but you're going to have to do it, and you're going to have to survive. So, that's how we got there.